Captain Jack Churchill was unlike any officer the British Army had ever seen. Born in 1906 in Hong Kong, he grew up fascinated by tales of knights, archery, and ancient battles. While most of his peers trained with rifles and pistols, he devoted hours to mastering the English longbow, a 6-foot weapon that had not been used in modern warfare for centuries. He carried a broadsword everywhere, even during inspections, and insisted that bagpipes were just as vital on the battlefield as any artillery. His fellow soldiers called him eccentric, his superiors called him reckless, and yet he believed that fear could be as powerful as bullets. By May 1940, the German army was sweeping across France with astonishing speed. The British Expeditionary Force was retreating, morale was low, and conventional tactics seemed inadequate against tanks and machine guns. Amid this chaos, Churchill found himself crouched behind a stone wall near L'Épinette. The morning mist hung thick over the fields, and through it he could see German soldiers advancing, confident and unknowing of the oddity awaiting them. He nocked an arrow, drew the longbow with practiced precision, and released it. The shaft found its mark, and a Wehrmacht sergeant fell at 30 yards. Around him, other British officers shook their heads in disbelief. Modern manuals had declared weapons like this obsolete, yet there it was, a single arrow creating both casualties and confusion. What made Churchill remarkable wasn't just his aim, it was the way he understood the mind of the enemy. Modern soldiers were trained to expect rifles and artillery. They were not trained to see a 6-foot bowman calmly drawing in the mist, a sword at his side, his eyes locked on them. The shock of the unexpected disrupted their focus. Fear, he realized, could be weaponized. In that moment, history's oldest weapon proved that psychology could rival firepower. As days passed, Churchill's unusual tactics continued. He charged patrols armed with only his sword when ammunition ran low. He used the longbow not merely to kill, but to unsettle entire units. Reports trickled back to the War Office of German soldiers frozen in fear, unable to respond to what they considered madness. Fellow British soldiers began to notice that his approach, though risky, had a strange effectiveness. Soldiers who survived these encounters often spoke in awe about the officer who carried the tools of a bygone era into the horrors of modern warfare and lived to tell the tale. Churchill's obsession with medieval warfare was more than eccentricity, it was strategic genius. He meticulously studied old battle formations, reading histories of English longbowmen at Agincourt and Crécy, looking for ways to adapt them to modern skirmishes. He understood that anticipation was an enemy's weakness, and that unpredictability could magnify the impact of even a single soldier. Even the smallest gesture, like a sudden appearance with his sword or an arrow streaking silently through the mist, could stop a German advance in its tracks. By combining courage, timing, and psychological insight, he became a force multiplier, capable of turning small actions into disproportionate effects. Even amidst the chaos of retreat, his audacity inspired those around him, creating a legend that would echo through the British command for years to come. In those early days of 1940, Captain Jack Churchill demonstrated that sometimes, to defeat a modern army, one must think like a medieval warrior. Jack Churchill's methods were unconventional to the point of disbelief. While most British officers carried rifles, pistols, and grenades, Churchill insisted on traveling into battle with a 6-foot-long English longbow slung across his back, a gleaming broadsword at his side, and bagpipes strapped to his chest. To his peers, it seemed madness. To the War Office, it was reckless. Yet on the battlefield, it was brilliant. The weaponry of the past became a psychological hammer, striking fear and uncertainty into the hearts of soldiers trained to fight against modern firepower. By 1941, Churchill had become a legend among British commandos. He meticulously adapted medieval tactics to modern combat, studying historic battles and formations to understand how surprise, timing, and audacity could create outsized effects. In Norway, during Operation Archery, he led his men onto enemy-held beaches while playing the bagpipes, sword in hand. German defenders froze, caught between disbelief and fear. They were facing an officer who seemed to belong to another era entirely, one who embraced the theater of war as much as its violence. The longbow, an archaic weapon in the age of rifles and machine guns, became an instrument of terror. Churchill's arrows were precise, but it was the shock of seeing a 6-foot soldier calmly firing a centuries-old weapon at them that caused hesitation. His enemies could not predict his actions. He moved unpredictably, often charging alone, sword raised, inspiring both awe and terror. Small groups of German soldiers surrendered or retreated simply to avoid facing him in direct combat. Reports from the field described officers hesitating, thinking they were encountering madness rather than skill, a pause that often turned the tide of small engagements. Churchill's fascination with medieval warfare was more than eccentricity, it was strategy. He understood that soldiers could be as defeated by fear as by bullets. A sudden arrow striking silently from a distance, a sword glinting in the sun, or the mournful sound of bagpipes approaching through mist could slow an advance, disrupt formations, and buy precious time for his unit. His actions forced commanders to reconsider how psychological elements could be integrated into operations, proving that terror could be as effective as firepower when wielded with precision. Even among his own troops, his methods inspired confidence. Soldiers who served alongside him learned to anticipate his audacity, following his example in improvisation and aggression. They saw that courage combined with unpredictability could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Churchill's reputation spread quickly. To the British, he was a fearless warrior. To the Germans, a figure of nightmare legend. Each encounter reinforced a simple lesson he had proven in France. Modern armies are not invincible against audacity and imagination. Fear is a weapon, and when wielded effectively, it can be as lethal as any modern armament. By the end of his campaigns in Norway, it was clear that Captain Jack Churchill had turned the rules of warfare upside down. He had transformed ancient weapons into instruments of modern psychological warfare, showing that the oldest tools, when combined with courage and creativity, could alter the course of battles. His exploits were not mere spectacle, they were proof that strategy could transcend technology, that audacity could outperform firepower, and that one man's vision could redefine the battlefield. For Churchill, medieval weapons were not relics, they were instruments of dominance, proving that history's lessons, if understood and applied creatively, could surprise even the most disciplined modern armies. By December 1941, Jack Churchill's reputation had grown into legend. His unusual methods had caught the attention of British High Command, and he was assigned to lead small commando raids in Norway. Operation Archery, a daring assault on German coastal positions, became the stage for some of his most extraordinary exploits. As the landing craft approached the beaches, Churchill did not hesitate or hide. He stood at the bow, bagpipes strapped to his chest, the notes of the March of the Cameron Men cutting through the cold morning air. His men could hardly believe it, and the German defenders even less so. They were confronted with a figure who seemed to have stepped straight out of the medieval past into the modern world of machine guns and trenches. Churchill led the charge with his broadsword drawn, often engaging the enemy at close range. Ammunition was limited, and when his men paused to reload or take cover, Churchill would press forward alone, slashing through obstacles and inspiring his soldiers by sheer audacity. In one notable encounter, German sentries hesitated as he advanced, sword in hand, bow ready at his back. Their confusion and fear gave the commandos the advantage, allowing the unit to secure the beachhead with minimal casualties. The psychological impact of one man, armed with the weapons of another era, was profound. The longbow remained a signature part of his arsenal, though he often used it less for killing and more for intimidation. An arrow streaking silently from the mist toward a German officer, or the sight of Churchill standing upright amidst smoke and gunfire, created hesitation in the enemy ranks. Time and again, small units of Germans would retreat or surrender rather than face him directly. Reports from the operation highlighted that his presence was almost surreal to the enemy, an officer who laughed at the modern rules of engagement, combining noise, movement, and spectacle into a terrifying form of psychological warfare. Churchill's courage and creativity extended beyond combat technique. He studied the terrain carefully, turning every hill, building, and shoreline into a potential stage for his audacious style. He coordinated with his men to maximize the shock effect, timing charges and distractions to exploit the enemy's fear. Even seasoned German soldiers, trained for efficiency and discipline, were unsettled by his unpredictability. The mixture of medieval weaponry, showmanship, and tactical acumen created a force multiplier, making small numbers capable of achieving objectives that would have seemed impossible under conventional doctrine. While Operation Archery was only one of many raids, it demonstrated the effectiveness of Churchill's approach. His combination of audacity, psychological insight, and personal bravery inspired his men and terrified the enemy. He proved that the battlefield was not just about firepower or technology, but also about perception, courage, and the ability to exploit fear. After the operation, stories of Churchill charging German positions with bagpipes blaring and sword raised spread quickly, cementing his legend among both British and German forces. By the end of the Norway campaigns, it was clear that Captain Jack Churchill had redefined what a commando could be. He had shown that daring, imagination, and psychological tactics could triumph over superior numbers and modern weapons. His actions during Operation Archery became a blueprint for unconventional warfare, emphasizing that the mind could be as powerful a weapon as the rifle. In every arrow fired, every sword swung, and every note of bagpipes echoing across the fjords, Churchill proved that the medieval warrior could survive and even dominate on the modern battlefield.
Captain Jack Churchill understood that war was as much about the mind as it was about bullets. By the time he had completed his early campaigns in France and Norway, he had observed a pattern. Fear could be cultivated, measured, and weaponized. Conventional armies trained soldiers to expect rifles, artillery, and tanks. They were not trained to respond to a figure stepping from the mist with a 6-foot bow, a broadsword in hand, and bagpipes blasting across a battlefield. The mere sight of Churchill became a weapon in itself, a signal that something unexpected and terrifying was about to happen. Reports from the field consistently described German troops hesitating when confronted by him. Soldiers froze in open ground, unsure whether to fire, retreat, or surrender. Even experienced officers found themselves unsettled by his audacity. He had discovered that fear was contagious. Hesitation in one soldier could ripple through an entire unit, causing disarray and breaking formations. In countless small engagements, this pause proved decisive, allowing his commando teams to achieve objectives that would have been impossible through conventional assault alone. Churchill refined these methods deliberately. His approach was not reckless improvisation, but a carefully considered form of psychological warfare. A sudden arrow from the mist, a sword flashing in the sun, or the mournful, dissonant notes of bagpipes approaching across a fjord created moments of panic. These moments slowed German reaction times, disrupted their coordination, and allowed smaller British units to outmaneuver larger forces. By making the enemy uncertain of what to expect, Churchill turned his eccentricity into a tactical advantage. Even his own men were inspired by this approach. Observing Churchill's courage and theatrical audacity, soldiers learned to act boldly, using fear to their advantage. Small teams became more aggressive, taking calculated risks that conventional doctrine might have discouraged. The combination of his example, the shock value of his medieval weapons, and the tactical precision of his command created a multiplier effect. In engagements where numbers and firepower might have favored the Germans, British commandos found themselves seizing victory against the odds. Churchill's impact extended far beyond the battlefield. Stories of his raids and singular heroism spread quickly through the ranks and across theaters of war. Enemy officers reported encountering a madman wielding a sword and bow, advancing with confidence and unyielding presence. In some cases, entire German units surrendered simply to avoid facing him in close combat. The psychological effect was magnified because his attacks were unpredictable, daring, and theatrical. Churchill had transformed himself into a living legend, a symbol of audacity and fearlessness. By the end of these campaigns, it was clear that Captain Jack Churchill had perfected a form of warfare that few modern strategists had fully understood. His innovations proved that audacity, timing, and imagination could amplify the effectiveness of even the most ancient weapons. Fear became a tool, a force multiplier, and a way to achieve victory where conventional tactics might fail. Churchill had not only survived against modern armies, he had mastered them, showing that the mind could be as deadly as any gun and that the legacy of medieval warfare still had a place on the modern battlefield. His actions demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful weapon in war is not found in arsenals, but in courage, creativity, and the ability to strike terror into the heart of the enemy.
By the time World War II was drawing toward its final years, Captain Jack Churchill had already carved his name into history. He was no ordinary officer. He was a symbol of audacity, ingenuity, and the unexpected power of psychological warfare. Despite the rise of tanks, machine guns, and aerial bombardment, Churchill continued to wield his longbow and broadsword, proving that courage, imagination, and sheer unpredictability could achieve results that pure firepower could not. His actions were more than personal heroics. They were lessons in the enduring value of audacity. In 1940, during the retreat through France, he scored what would later be recognized as the last confirmed longbow kill in modern warfare. A single arrow struck a German sergeant at 30 yards, demonstrating that even in the age of machine guns, one man armed with a centuries-old weapon could alter the course of a skirmish. But the significance was not just the kill itself, it was the psychological shock it delivered. Soldiers around him, both allies and enemies, watched in disbelief as a medieval weapon found relevance on a modern battlefield. That moment encapsulated the essence of Churchill's approach. Fear, courage, and surprise could be more decisive than numbers or technology. Churchill's legacy extended far beyond individual feats and bravery. His methods influenced British special forces, shaping commando tactics from Norway to Italy. Officers studying his operations learned that battlefield psychology could magnify the impact of small units, that audacious actions could unbalance an enemy's strategy, and that morale, both for one's own troops and the opposition, was a powerful weapon. His use of bagpipes, swords, and bows became more than eccentricities. They were intentional, calculated tools to unsettle opponents and inspire allies. Even after the war, Churchill's story inspired military thinkers, historians, and soldiers alike. He demonstrated that adaptability and imagination could challenge conventional doctrine. The legend of Mad Jack, as he was sometimes called, grew because he reminded everyone that modern warfare did not eliminate the value of courage, creativity, and spectacle. His life showed that timing, boldness, and psychological insight could multiply the effectiveness of a single soldier to levels unimaginable by conventional standards. What made Churchill's achievements extraordinary was not just skill, but his fearlessness in the face of overwhelming odds. He survived ambushes, artillery fire, and close-quarters combat that would have overwhelmed any ordinary soldier. At times, he appeared almost mythical, a lone figure charging German positions with a sword drawn, bagpipes blaring, arrows flying from his longbow. These actions were meticulously calculated, demonstrating a mastery of both fear and opportunity. His presence on the battlefield was like a force of nature, unexpected, unstoppable, and unforgettable. Ultimately, Captain Jack Churchill's life and career offer enduring lessons. Technology changes, armies evolve, and weapons become more powerful, but the human element of fear, morale, and audacity remains constant. He proved that history's oldest tools, when used with strategy and confidence, could still dominate the battlefield. He left a legacy not only of combat heroism, but of a mindset that the unconventional can triumph when executed with boldness and precision. In every arrow fired, every sword swung, and every note of bagpipes echoing over battlefields, Churchill showed that true mastery of warfare combines intellect, bravery, and the ability to surprise. Even today, his story reminds us that courage and imagination can turn the tide of conflict, and that the lessons of the past can remain relevant, even in the most modern of wars. His audacity remains a timeless example of how one determined individual can challenge the very limits of expectation, rewrite the rules of combat, and inspire generations of soldiers and strategists to come.